Hey, leave this down in the comments. When is it important to be dependent upon somebody else? Hey everybody, welcome to The Whole Truth, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and we are not skipping anything. So if that sounds good to you, make sure that you reach down, hit the little subscribe button below, no matter what platform you're on. That way when there's new content coming out, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook or a podcast somewhere, you'll be notified when that content comes out. And if you need all the content in one convenient location, easy to get to, you can go to thewholetruthbiblestudy.com, and you'll find all the videos there in one convenient location. And I have gone from Genesis all the way now through the book of Numbers, and the plan is to go all the way through Revelation. So I hope you'll stick with me through this project. Today we are in Numbers chapter 9 and then in verse 15. In Numbers chapter 9 and starting in verse 15, we are going to be reminded of something. We've heard of this before, but we're kind of told a little bit more depth about it. Remember, there's this guy named Moses, and he's writing after the fact. He's writing after these events have happened in his life and in the life of Israel. So he's writing from a future perspective about something that's going to happen. And you might know about it, maybe you don't. It's this cloud that the Israelite people, it's the cloud, the Shekinah glory cloud of God, and the Israelite people are going to follow it. If it's on the tabernacle, if it's resting, the cloud, the Shekinah glory cloud is resting, then the people of God will stay there. But if it's not, if it's moving, then they pack up and they move. How is that important? Like, why does that matter? And how does that apply to us? Oh, I hope you'll stick with me today. I think it's going to be a good one. So this is Numbers chapter 9 and verse 15. Now, on the day that the tabernacle was raised up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, from evening until morning. It was above the tabernacle like the appearance of fire. So it was always the cloud covered it by day and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after that the children of Israel would journey. And in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. At the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord, they would camp. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained encamped. And when the cloud continued many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. And so it was when the cloud was above the tabernacle a few days, according to the command of the Lord, they would remain encamped, and according to the command of the Lord, they would journey. So it was when the cloud remained only from evening until morning, then the cloud was taken up in the morning, and then they would journey, whether by day or by night. And whether the cloud was taken up, they would journey. Whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year that the cloud remained above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would remain encamped and not journey. But when it was taken up, they would journey. At the command of the Lord, they remained encamped, and at the command of the Lord, they journeyed. They kept the charge of the Lord, and at the command of the Lord, by the hand of Moses. So you see that story? There's this cloud, the Shekinah glory cloud, that shows up on the day that the tabernacle, remember the tabernacle, there's a whole study on that. You got to go back into my Exodus videos and you'll find the tabernacle series. And there's this cloud, the glory cloud of the Lord, that shows up over top of the tabernacle. And it's God's way of showing the people that he is in this, that he is blessing this. This is what he wants, that he has approved it. He ordained it, and he is the one who sanctioned it, and he is the one who is approving it. You also see the same type of thing later when the temple is built and the cloud of the Lord fills up the temple, and nobody could go into the temple that Solomon built because it was filled with the cloud of the Lord. In the same way, the cloud is now hovering over top of the tabernacle. And so if the cloud was hovering over the top of the tabernacle, the people knew to stay. And at night, this cloud was a pillar of fire by night. Now, for just a moment, could you take a second and think about how awesome, how magnificent this must be? Also, how eerie and how troublesome this might be. And then I also want you to think about how practical this might be. Think of the fact that they didn't ask for this. They didn't petition the Lord for this. They just did what they were told to do. They built the tabernacle, and then boom, God shows up in this cloud. And that night when the sun is going down, they're starting to notice the cloud is on fire. And at night, it is a flaming cloud. And they notice this flaming cloud at night. And then in the morning, when they wake back up, it's back to being a pillowy cloud that is over top of the tabernacle. And whenever the cloud would be moved, whenever it would remove, the people would obey. They knew that it was the glory cloud of the Lord. It was the Shekinah glory cloud. They would pack up their things and they would follow. And then when the cloud would stop, that's where they would stop. So you can imagine how awesome this was, but you can also imagine how kind of, I'm sure, scary to some this was to see this cloud show up and then it to be on fire. I'm sure that for some there was kind of a moment of like, whoa, what are we looking at here? What is happening? Is this God being pleased with us, or is God angry with us? And it probably took a little bit of time for them to get used to this happening. Now remember, the Israelite people are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. So we're reading Moses, who wrote, and he talked about the wilderness wanderings for 40 years, that how they would, if it even was over the camp for a year, they would stay for a year. But if it was just a day or 2 days, they would just stay in that camp for a day or 2 days. They would pack up and they would move and they would settle based on where the Lord was. Now, let's talk practically for a moment, because there's some practical things here. Think about the fact that where the cloud was during the day in the middle of the wilderness in the hot sun, this cloud would offer shade. And at night in the cool desert at night, the fire would offer heat. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about how practical it was, what God had done by providing this cloud? And he's giving them instruction. Here's the part about God's instruction in the Shekinah glory cloud that the people would follow that I think I really want you to gather today. I think it's what the Lord wanted us to gather, which is the obedience that was necessary in following the Lord. God didn't want them to get used to a routine. If he did, he would have given them a routine. He would have said, on every seventh day, you have the Sabbath, and then the day after the Sabbath, you need to pack up the camp and go so many miles to the west or so many miles to the east. And he could have given them those type of instructions and said, every so many days, get up and do this. But instead of giving them that routine, he didn't give them any instructions. He simply gave them the cloud that was offering them shade, the cloud that was offering them his own presence, the cloud that was assurance. You are right where God told you to be. The pillar of fire by night offering warmth. It's practical and it's right here for you. But when it moves, you have to move. When God moves, you have to move. Think about that. That is the obedient Christian life that we want to get to. That's where I want to be. If God's moving, I want to be there. And if God is having me stay still, I want to be there. Is that where your desire is? Is that where your heart is? I've heard it referenced like surfing, and I love this analogy so much because one, it's one of my bucket list things to do is to go surfing. I want to go surfing so bad. One day I'm going to be out there on the water and I'm going to be surfing. You'll see a picture of it on Instagram, I'm sure. But I love the idea of surfing. I've never been. I think I could do it. Maybe I can't. I don't know. But I know this. A surfer gets out on the water and he does not stand on his board and try to create waves. I get in my pool sometimes with my kids and I'll take a float and I'll jump on the float and I'll create waves in the pool. But a surfer doesn't create waves. A surfer just goes where the waves are. And the waves that God creates, that's what he rides. That's what I want to do. Where the Lord's moving, I want to go there. And when the Lord is still, I want to be there. And the Lord doesn't do that through routine. He doesn't do that by saying on every day, on this time, do this certain thing this way. No, he simply says, will you follow me where I'm moving? Will you go when I tell you to go? Will you stay when I tell you to stay? A little bit ago, like earlier this year, there was a revival that broke out in Asbury here in Kentucky at a college university. This revival broke out. And if you don't know the story, it's a pretty cool story as this revival broke out. And basically what happened was like after a weekday service that they had, some college students stayed and began to sing, and they were just singing and praying, and they just didn't stop. And then people started joining them, and they were singing and praying, and they didn't stop, and people started joining them, and people started joining them. And before you knew it, like a whole day, they'd been worshiping for 24 hours, but then they just kept going, and it was like 48 hours, and then they just kept going. It was like 36 hour or 60 hours and so on. Like it just kept going, and it just kept going to the point after several days, people were coming from other states to come here and participate in that revival. I'm here in Kentucky, and I headed over to Asbury one Sunday evening, I headed over to Asbury because I wanted to be where God was moving. I loved the idea in that revival that it was spontaneous. It just happened. God was moving and people wanted it. And it went on for days and days and days and days. Honestly, I was a little disappointed when the college kind of shut that down to get back to classes and things as regular. And they started putting some time constraints on it and saying, well, from this time to this time, it's for college students. And from this time to this time, then other people can come. And I thought that was kind of crazy to me. I thought, well, if the Lord's moving, why would we want to stop it? Why would we want to get back to routine as normal? Why would we want to be in that routine? If God's moving, let's just let him move. Hey, do you hear that? Do you want life to be routine as normal? Or do you want to follow God when he's moving? Because where he is practical. That's where he's your shade. All the Psalms that you hear that God will be your shade from the heat. Read the Psalms. I've been reading the Psalms at night on Instagram, doing these little reels. All the Psalms that say that God will be your shade. He'll be at your right hand and he'll be your shade. Well, how can you have that unless you'll go where God is? How can God be your comfort and your warmth unless you go where God is? If he moves, you move. If he stays, you stay. Look how practical the book of Numbers is becoming. Numbers chapter 9 today and into Numbers chapter 10 tomorrow. I hope you'll come along with me. See you guys then.